Welcome back, everyone, and if you're new here, I'm so glad you found the channel. We're on an exciting journey to reach 10k subscribers by next year, and every like, comment and subscription brings us one step closer. Your support means everything. Now, let's jump into today's video. My name is Ben Blackwood, and for the past decade I've devoted my life to exposing what I believe is humanity's greatest deception. Through my YouTube channel Uncovered Horizons and podcast The Edge of Truth, I've built a community of over 2 million followers who share my conviction. The Earth is not a sphere. The government, NASA, and a global elite have perpetuated this lie for centuries, controlling the population through this fundamental deception about the very ground beneath our feet. I've spent countless hours analysing NASA photographs, identifying inconsistencies in satellite imagery, and demonstrating how commercial flight paths make no sense on a curved surface. I've interviewed whistleblowers, studied ancient texts, and compiled what I believed was irrefutable evidence. My apartment walls were covered with maps, diagrams, and photographs, a physical manifestation of my obsession. But words and theories weren't enough anymore. The scientific establishment kept dismissing my evidence as misunderstandings or amateur mistakes. The mainstream media portrayed me as a crackpot, a modern-day Don Quixote tilting at windmills. Even some within the flat earth community questioned whether I was truly committed to the cause or just profiting from controversy. I needed undeniable proof, something so compelling that even the most ardent globe believer couldn't ignore it. And then it hit me during a late-night research session. The ultimate evidence would come from seeing Earth with my own eyes, not through NASA's manipulated images or the controlled viewports of commercial airlines, but from space itself. If I could go to space, document the journey myself with equipment I controlled, I could finally reveal the truth to the world. You're probably thinking I'm crazy. That's fine. I'm used to it. My own family thought I was having a breakdown when I first embraced the flat earth theory. My friends gradually distanced themselves as my convictions grew stronger and my public presence more controversial. But my followers believed in me. When I launched the crowdfunding campaign, Truth Beyond the Horizon, we raised $32 million in just 6 months. Private space travel is expensive, but not impossible anymore. Not with that kind of money and the right connections. My younger sister Emma was the only family member who stuck by me through everything, even though she never bought into my theories. As an independent journalist who had made a name for herself with unflinching documentary pieces on fringe beliefs and movements, she saw an opportunity too good to pass up. Documenting her conspiracy theorist brother's journey to space to prove the Earth is flat. Whether I was right or wrong, it would make one hell of a story. You realize this could completely destroy everything you've built if you're wrong. She told me the night before we signed the final contracts with Celestial Horizons, the private space company we'd hired for the mission. We were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights spread out below us like a circuit board. I was nursing a glass of whiskey, trying to calm the mixture of excitement and anxiety churning in my stomach. "I'm not wrong," I said simply, staring at the few visible stars, fighting through the light pollution. "And when I prove it, everything changes. History books, science education, our understanding of reality itself, it all gets rewritten." Emma studied me with the penetrating gaze that had made reluctant interview subjects spill their deepest secrets on camera. "And if you are wrong, what then?" I hadn't allowed myself to seriously consider that possibility. "Then, at least I'll have tried. I'll have sought the truth with everything I had." She nodded slowly, raising a glass. "To the truth, then, whatever it may be." We clinked glasses, and I tried to ignore the knot of doubt that had formed in my chest. I couldn't afford doubt. Not now, not after coming so far. Finding a crew willing to take me seriously was perhaps the hardest part of the entire endeavour. Most reputable scientists and astronauts laughed in my face, or hung up as soon as I explained my purpose, but money talks, and eventually we secured 2 key team members, Dr. Linda Marshall, a brilliant astrophysicist and engineer who had worked with NASA for 15 years before moving to the private sector, and Carlos Sanchez, a former astronaut with 3 previous missions under his belt, who now worked as a consultant for commercial space ventures. Dr. Marshall made no secret of her skepticism. During our first meeting in her cluttered university office, she fixed me with a penetrating stare over her wire-rimmed glasses, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Mr. Blackwood, I want to be clear about something. I'm joining this mission for the scientific equipment and research opportunities the funding provides, not because I believe in your theories." Her voice was crisp, authoritative, with the slight impatience of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. "That's perfect," I replied with a smile. "I don't need you to believe, I just need you to witness." She raised an eyebrow. "Science isn't about witnessing, it's about measurement, verification, reproducibility." "Then measure. Verify. Just do it without the biases of an institution that has a vested interest in maintaining the spherical Earth narrative." She almost smiled at that, though it looked more like a grimace. "Your funding will allow me to test some promising theories about radiation shielding in low Earth orbit. For that, I'm willing to endure your alternative perspectives." Carlos was more diplomatic when we met at a quiet bar near the Celestial Horizons headquarters. Tall, with salt and pepper hair and the confident posture of someone who had spent years adapting to zero gravity, he approached my theory with professional courtesy. "I've seen the Earth from above, Ben," he told me privately, after we'd gone through the preliminary mission protocols. The ice in his bourbon clinked as he set the glass down. "But I respect your right to see it for yourself. Just understand that space is dangerous. We follow protocols up there regardless of personal beliefs." There was something in his eyes when he mentioned seeing Earth. A flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. Not exactly doubt, but a shadow of uncertainty that gave me hope. Perhaps even career astronauts weren't immune to questioning what they'd been conditioned to see. "I'll follow your lead up there," I assured him. "My goal is truth, not endangering the mission." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Every person who goes to space comes back changed in some way. I'm curious to see how it changes you." I didn't tell him that I had no intention of changing my beliefs. I was going to space to confirm them, not question them. The weeks leading up to launch were a blur of training, medical examinations, and equipment preparation. Emma documented everything, her camera capturing my journey from conspiracy theorist to amateur astronaut. My followers watched each update with religious devotion, their donations continuing to pour in to fund additional experiments and better recording equipment. The mission plan was straightforward. Our custom-built space station, the Ascendant, would orbit Earth at approximately 350 kilometers above the surface for 2 weeks. We would conduct various experiments to measure the planet's curvature, document the view from multiple angles, and live stream our findings to my audience. The Ascendant itself was relatively small compared to the International Space Station, just 4 sleeping quarters, a central command module, a laboratory, and the crown jewel, a 180-degree observation dome with unparalleled views of Earth below. The launch day arrived on a brilliant April morning. As we suited up at the Celestial Horizons facility in the New Mexico desert, Emma filmed everything, capturing my confidence for posterity. "Today we make history," I proclaimed to her camera, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Today we pull back the curtain on centuries of deception." Dr. Marshall rolled her eyes behind me, but I didn't care. Soon I would have vindication. The walk to the launch vehicle was surreal, like a dream where you find yourself performing an important task you haven't prepared for. The rocket loomed above us, gleaming white against the clear blue sky, vapor curling from its cryogenic tanks. Technicians swarmed around it like worker ants, performing final checks and adjustments. "Having second thoughts?" Emma asked quietly as we paused for a moment before ascending the gantry. I shook my head. "None. You?" She smiled, adjusting in her camera. "Are you kidding? This is the story of a lifetime." The four of us, me, Emma, Dr. Marshall, and Carlos, ascended to the crew capsule and strapped in. The interior was cramped, but state-of-the-art, screens displaying a dizzying array of information about the vehicle's systems. Carlos and Dr. Marshall went through pre-launch checks with practiced efficiency, while Emma and I sat in anxious silence. "T-minus 10 minutes, came the voice of mission control through our headsets. I closed my eyes, mentally reviewing all the research that had led me to this moment, all the inconsistencies in the globe model, all the evidence of a flat, stationary Earth, all the reasons to believe we'd been lied to for generations. "Nervous?" Carlos asked, noticing my closed eyes. "Focused," I replied. The rocket launch was violent and terrifying. Nothing in my preparation had truly readied me for the bone-crushing force of leaving Earth's atmosphere. For several minutes that felt like hours, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only endure as we punched through the sky. The roar was deafening despite our helmets. The vibration so intense, I feared my teeth might shatter. And then, suddenly, weightlessness. Calm. The brutal roar of engines gave way to the gentle hum of environmental systems as our capsule separated from the final stage and began its approach to the Ascendant, which had been placed in orbit a week earlier. "Welcome to space, Truth Seeker," Carlos announced as he unstrapped from his seat, floating with practiced ease. "Let's get you oriented before you start rewriting the science books." The docking procedure was tense but uneventful, Carlos guiding our capsule to the station with the precision of a surgeon. There was a muffled clang, a series of mechanical whirs, as the airlocks engaged, and then we were aboard the Ascendant, our home for the next 2 weeks. Our first few days aboard were dedicated to acclimating and setting up equipment. Zero gravity was both exhilarating and frustrating. Simple tasks became complicated puzzles, and my stomach seemed perpetually unsure if it was hungry or nauseous. Emma adapted surprisingly quickly, delighting in floating through the station with her camera, capturing our new reality from every angle. The station was compact but state-of-the-art, with 4 private sleeping quarters hardly bigger than closets, a central command module filled with control panels and monitoring equipment, a small laboratory where Dr. Marshall set up her experiments, and most importantly, the observation dome. This dome, with its unobstructed view of the supposed planet below, would be where I would gather my evidence. I must admit, the first time I entered the dome and saw Earth suspended against the blackness of space, I felt a moment of doubt. From the observation dome, Earth appeared curved, just as all the fake NASA photos showed. The continents were instantly recognizable. Africa and Europe, clearly visible during our first orbit, the blue of the ocean striking against the browns and greens of the land masses. But I quickly reminded myself about fisheye lenses and visual distortions. Our scientific instruments would reveal the truth, not potentially deceptive human eyes. I had specifically brought equipment designed to measure the actual shape of the Earth, unbiased by preconceptions. "The curvature you're seeing is an optical illusion," I explained during my first live stream, speaking confidently to my millions of viewers while floating in front of the dome. "The glass of the observation dome creates a subtle distortion. Our instruments will measure the true shape once we're fully calibrated." Emma captured my certainty on camera, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. Dr. Marshall worked quietly in the background, setting up her equipment with methodical precision. Carlos monitored our orbit and systems, professional despite what must have been his private amusement at my claims. By the 4th day, I began to grow impatient. Our initial measurements weren't providing the clear evidence of flatness I had expected. In fact, they seemed to confirm conventional science. The laser ranging system I'd specially designed to detect the flat plane of Earth was instead showing consistent results matching a spherical body approximately 12,742 kilometers in diameter, exactly what mainstream science claimed. The instruments must be compromised, I insisted as Dr. Marshall showed me the latest readings in the lab module. The data scrolled across the screen, mocking my convictions with its consistency. They're calibrated based on the assumption of a spherical Earth. That's not how scientific instruments work, Ben, she replied, her patience visibly wearing thin. They measure what's there, not what we expect to see. The laser measures distance. Period. It doesn't have a preconceived notion of shape. There must be another explanation, I muttered, pushing away from the screen and propelling myself toward the door. I need to check the equipment again. I began spending hours alone in the observation dome, staring down at Earth, searching for the edge, for any sign of the ice wall I believed surrounded our flat world. The longer I stared, the more I convinced myself I could see inconsistencies in the curvature, places where the round shapes seemed to flatten or distort. When we passed over Antarctica, I was sure I caught glimpses of structures that shouldn't exist according to conventional maps. Perhaps the edge itself, or military installations guarding it. That night I couldn't sleep. The humming of the station seemed louder, more persistent, with a rhythmic quality I hadn't noticed before. My tiny sleeping quarters felt suffocating despite the zero gravity. I floated through the dimly lit corridors, making my way back to the observation dome. In the darkness of space, with only the ambient lights of the station illuminating the glass, I noticed something strange. A flicker. Something moving past our station, too fast and too large to be space debris. It was gone before I could focus on it, leaving only a vague impression of mass and direction. I grabbed one of our cameras and pointed it toward the area where I'd seen the movement. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, just as I was about to give up, I saw it again. A shadow, darker than the surrounding void, moving with purpose. It wasn't the irregular tumbling of debris or the predictable trajectory of a satellite. This was something deliberate. I checked our radar systems, but they showed nothing nearby. No satellites, no debris, nothing that could explain what I was seeing. A chill ran down my spine, despite the carefully controlled temperature of the station. The next morning, I reviewed the footage, but it showed nothing unusual. Just stars and darkness. I considered showing it to the others, but hesitated. They already thought I was delusional. Hallucinating shadows in space wouldn't help my credibility. Instead, I focused on our experiments. Dr. Marshall had set up a sophisticated laser measurement system designed to calculate the exact curvature of the horizon from our vantage point. Today was our first full test. If the Earth is flat, the laser will maintain a consistent distance to the surface across all measurement points, I explained to Emma's camera, trying to keep my voice confident, despite my growing unease. If it's curved, we'll see varying distances. Dr. Marshall initiated the sequence, and we all watched as the data populated the screens. The laser measurements showed exactly what conventional science predicted. A curved surface consistent with a planetary sphere, approximately 12,742 kilometers in diameter. The evidence is conclusive, Ben, Dr. Marshall said, not unkindly. The Earth is round. I refused to accept it. The equipment must be malfunctioning, or it's been programmed with biased algorithms. We used your equipment, she pointed out. Equipment you specified and verified before launch. Carlos placed a hand on my shoulder. Ben, at some point, you have to be willing to accept what the evidence tells you. That's what real scientific inquiry is about. Following the data, even when it challenges your beliefs. I shrugged away from his touch. I know what I believe, and I know there's more to discover. I pushed off from the console and propelled myself toward my quarters, needing space to think to reconcile what I was seeing with what I believed. That night, as the others slept, I heard it for the first time. A faint static coming through the communication system, like a distant radio signal struggling to break through. I was in the command module, running additional diagnostics on our measurement equipment, when it started, so quietly at first that I thought I was imagining it. But as I listened more carefully, I realized there were patterns within the static. Not words exactly, but something structured, intentional, rising and falling in sequences that seemed just beyond my comprehension. I recorded it using my personal equipment and spent hours analysing the sound. There was something almost musical about the patterns, like a language composed entirely of tonal shifts and rhythmic pulses. When I played certain sections repeatedly, I began to feel as if I could almost understand it, like a word on the tip of my tongue, meaning hovering just beyond grasp. More disturbing was the way the patterns seemed to respond when I spoke aloud. When I asked questions into the void, "What are you? Can you understand me?" The static would shift, the patterns becoming more complex, more urgent. On the 5th day, Emma noticed my exhaustion as I floated listlessly in the observation dome. "You're not sleeping," she observed as she filmed me staring out at the stars. Dark circles had formed under my eyes, and I hadn't bothered to shave in days. "There's something out there, Emma," I whispered, not wanting Carlos or Dr. Marshall to overhear. We were alone in the dome, the Earth a blue-green crescent below us, as we entered the night side of our orbit. Something watching us. She lowered her camera, her expression shifting from professional detachment to genuine concern. "Ben, space can play tricks on the mind. The isolation, the unfamiliar environment. It affects people in strange ways. Even seasoned astronauts report hallucinations sometimes." "It's not in my mind," I snapped, more harshly than I intended. "I've seen it. I've heard it." "Heard what?" I hesitated, then pulled out my tablet and played the recording of the static patterns. Emma's expression shifted from concern to confusion as she listened, her brow furrowing. "That could be interference from any number of sources," she said, but I could tell she was unsettled. The patterns were too regular, too structured to be random noise. "It responds, Emma. When I'm alone, when I ask questions, the patterns change." Before she could respond, an alarm blared through the station. 3 short bursts followed by a long tone. We rushed to the command module where Carlos was frantically checking systems, his fingers flying over control panels. "We're picking up an anomalous signal," he announced as we entered, "unlike anything I've ever seen." Dr. Marshall joined us, her face grim as she studied the readouts. "The signal's origin is approximately 20 kilometers from our position, but there's nothing there on visual or radar." "What kind of signal?" I asked, heart racing. I knew before they answered, it was the same pattern I'd been hearing privately for days. "That's the strange part," Carlos replied, his professional composure slipping slightly. "It's not radio, not microwave, not any known electromagnetic frequency. It's something else. Something our instruments can detect but can't properly classify." I felt a surge of vindication. "I've been picking up strange transmissions for days. You didn't believe me?" Dr. Marshall looked at me sharply. "You've been detecting signals and didn't report it." "Would you have believed me?" I challenged. "Would you have taken seriously anything that didn't fit neatly into your scientific worldview?" The alarm suddenly stopped, plunging the station into eerie silence. The screens monitoring the signal went blank, then rebooted, showing nothing unusual. "It's gone," Carlos said, checking and rechecking the systems. "Just vanished." But I knew it wasn't gone. It had simply hidden itself, waiting, and I was certain it would return. That night I dreamed of vast, impossible geometries, shapes that folded in on themselves, angles that couldn't exist in 3-dimensional space. I awoke gasping, feeling as if I'd been given a glimpse of something my mind wasn't equipped to comprehend. The next day, as we passed over the dark side of Earth, I saw it clearly for the first time. Through the observation dome, against the backdrop of stars, a massive shape moved with deliberate precision. It wasn't a satellite or space debris. It was something enormous, geometric, yet constantly shifting, as if its form couldn't quite be contained by three-dimensional space. "Carlos, Dr. Marshall, Emma," I shouted, not taking my eyes off the object. "You need to see this." They rushed to the dome, following my pointing finger to the starfield. "I don't see anything," Carlos said after a moment, squinting into the darkness. "There. How can you not see it?" I was practically pressing against the glass now. The object had grown larger, its edges pulsing with a faint luminescence that seemed to bend the light of the stars behind it. It was like a vast geometric lattice constantly folding and unfolding, revealing facets that seemed to contain entire galaxies within them. Dr. Marshall squinted in the direction I indicated. "There is something, a distortion in the starfield, like the light is being bent around an invisible mass." Emma raised her camera, focusing on the area. "The lens is having trouble focusing, like there's nothing there but the camera thinks there should be." Slowly, as we watched, the object moved closer. It was difficult to gauge its size without reference points, but it had to be massive, perhaps as large as our entire station. Its geometry was complex, with angles that seemed to fold into themselves, creating an effect that strained the eyes to follow. "What is that thing?" Emma whispered, her camera now recording continuously, despite its struggle to focus on the anomaly. Dr. Marshall's face had gone pale. There have been rumours, reports from astronauts seeing unexplained phenomena. Most are classified, dismissed as hallucinations or optical illusions caused by cosmic radiation. "You knew about this?" I demanded, turning to her. "Not this specifically," she answered, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "But there are things in space we don't understand. Phenomena that don't make it into official reports or public knowledge." Carlos had backed away from the window, his breathing rapid and shallow. On my second mission, my commander saw something similar. When we returned to Earth, officials debriefed him separately. He was reassigned to administrative duties afterward, never flew again. "What did he see exactly?" I pressed. Carlos shook his head. He wouldn't talk about it, not directly, but he would wake up screaming sometimes during the mission. When I asked him what was wrong, all he would say was, "They're watching. They've always been watching." The object was now unmistakable, a vast presence that dwarfed our station. It had taken on a more defined form, like an enormous eye, with concentric rings surrounding a central void that seemed to absorb all light. The rings rotated independently of each other, creating a hypnotic, almost nauseating effect. "We need to document this," I said, fumbling for my equipment. "The world needs to see." "No!" Carlos grabbed my arm with surprising force. "We don't know what that thing is or what it wants. Broadcasting it could be dangerous." "This could be first contact with an alien intelligence," Dr. Marshall said, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "We should attempt communication." Before anyone could stop her, she moved to the communication console and began broadcasting a simple series of tones, the universal greeting message developed for potential extraterrestrial encounters, a sequence of prime numbers and basic mathematical constants that any advanced intelligence should recognize as artificial and intentional. The response was immediate and terrifying. The object pulsed, emitting a wave of energy that passed through our station like a ghost. Every system simultaneously malfunctioned. Lights flickered, air circulators sputtered, and the gravity stabilizers faltered, leaving us floating chaotically. Through the station's speakers came a sound that chilled my blood. The same pattern of static I had been hearing, but amplified 1,000-fold, so loud it was physically painful. Emma screamed. covering her ears while Dr. Marshall stared at the console in horror as it sparked and smoked, and within that static, words began to form. Not spoken, not in any language, but somehow understood directly in our minds. Observers witnessed, experiment continues. The words weren't in English, weren't in any human language. They were concepts downloaded directly into our consciousness, bypassing the normal channels of perception. Each word contained layers of meaning that human language couldn't begin to express. Emma screamed again, clutching her head. Carlos crashed into a wall as the station's rotation became erratic. Dr. Marshall stared at the entity with a mixture of terror and fascination. I alone remained relatively calm, floating before the observation dome, face to face with the cosmic eye. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. This had never been about the shape of the Earth. That had merely been the lure, the curiosity that had drawn me to this exact point in space and time. "What are you?" I asked aloud. The entity's response filled my consciousness. "We are the architects. You are the observed." Each word concept expanded in my mind, revealing vistas of understanding. The architects, not creators or gods, but shapers, experimenters, observers from beyond what humans understood as reality. They had been present since before Earth formed, watching, occasionally intervening, studying the development of consciousness in all its forms. The observation dome began to crystallize, fracturing not into shards, but into facets, like a diamond being cut from within. Through each facet, I could see not stars, not space, but different versions of Earth. Some spherical, some flat, some shapes that defied description. Worlds upon worlds, realities stacked like pages in a book. "The Earth," I gasped, unable to complete the thought as my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. "Is whatever shape serves the experiment," came the reply, the concepts unfolding in layers of meaning. Your belief created a pathway. I understood then. The flat Earth theory wasn't wrong exactly. It was simply focused on a different version of reality, one of countless variations that existed simultaneously. My belief, my passionate conviction, had acted like a beacon, drawing the attention of the architects to our particular corner of existence. The facets of the dome began rotating, creating a kaleidoscope of Earths, each shifting and transforming. I understood then that reality wasn't fixed but mutable, shaped by perception and belief. The architects didn't create these realities, they studied them, catalogued how consciousness interacted with and shaped physical existence. Dr. Marshall had recovered enough to join me at the dome. "It's showing us parallel dimensions," she whispered, her scientific mind still functioning despite the terror. "Different versions of reality existing simultaneously." "We need to close the observation shield," Carlos shouted from the control panel. "Whatever that thing is, it's affecting our systems, our minds." "No!" I pushed away from the dome, floating toward him. "Don't you see, this is what I came to find. Not proof of a flat Earth, but proof that everything we know is just one version of reality." Carlos looked at me with horror. "You're under its influence, Ben. We all are." He reached for the emergency override, but before his fingers could touch the controls, every screen in the station displayed the same message. "The veil thins, come witness truth." The entity had fully enveloped our station now, its vast form creating a bubble around us that distorted our perception of space. Stars elongated into streaks of light, and the Earth below, whether flat or round I could no longer tell, seemed to fold in on itself like paper. "It wants us to go outside," I realized, moving toward the airlock with sudden certainty. "Ben, no!" Emma grabbed my arm, her camera forgotten, floating nearby. "That's suicide." "It's calling us," I insisted. "Don't you feel it?" And they did. I could see it in their eyes, the same pull, the same impossible curiosity, that had driven me to space in the first place. The entity wasn't hostile, I realized. It was curious. It wanted to show us something, to expand our understanding beyond the limited framework of human perception. Dr. Marshall was the first to understand. It's not calling us out. It's coming in. The walls of the station began to shimmer, becoming translucent. The boundary between inside and outside, between our reality and whatever existed beyond, was dissolving. The very atoms of the station seemed to be vibrating at a frequency that allowed them to phase between states of matter. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of revelation. All my life I had sought the truth behind the lies, and now I was about to receive it in its purest form. "We should prepare ourselves," I said calmly. Carlos had given up trying to restore the systems and now floated beside us, resigned. For what? For understanding. The entity's presence filled the station completely. The air vibrated with its consciousness, and our minds expanded to accommodate concepts that human language could never express. Time slowed, then stopped entirely. In that frozen moment, the entity communicated, not in words but in pure information, downloading directly into our consciousness. I saw the true nature of reality, not flat, not spherical, but multidimensional, existing simultaneously in countless states. Earth was both flat and round, and neither, depending on the observer and the observed. Space was not empty, but teeming with intelligences beyond human comprehension, entities that had watched and guided human development since the beginning. The conspiracy I had dedicated my life to exposing was both real and irrelevant, a single thread in an infinite tapestry of interlocking realities. The governments of Earth did hide the truth, but not because they understood it, because they feared what they glimpsed of it. The entity showed me humanity's place in the cosmos, not central, not special, but unique in our particular form of consciousness. We were one experiment among many, one expression of awareness in a universe filled with different forms of life and intelligence. Some of these forms were so alien that the human mind could only perceive them as geometric abstractions, while others were so similar they could walk among us undetected. Most profound was the revelation that consciousness itself was the fundamental force of the universe, not an emergent property of complex neural systems, but the underlying reality from which matter arose. The physical universe was a projection, a shared hallucination agreed upon by countless observers. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the entity began to withdraw. The station solidified around us, systems coming back online one by one. The observation dome cleared, showing once again the familiar view of Earth below, undeniably, undoubtedly spherical. We floated in stunned silence, trying to process what we had experienced. Minutes passed before anyone found the courage to speak. "Did that really happen?" Emma finally whispered, her camera clutched forgotten in her hand. Dr. Marshall moved to a console, checking readings with trembling hands. The instruments recorded something. Energy fluctuations, radiation patterns I've never seen before, but nothing that could explain that. Carlos simply stared out at the now normal starfield, his expression vacant. "It showed me my previous missions," he said quietly. "Things I saw but forgot. Things they made me forget when I returned to Earth." "Made you forget?" Emma asked. "There are protocols," he said, his voice distant, "when astronauts see things they shouldn't, things that don't fit our understanding of reality. They debrief you, and afterward, the memories are fuzzy, incomplete. You know something happened, but you can't quite remember what." I felt strangely calm, emptied of all the passionate certainty that had defined me for so long. "The Earth isn't flat," I admitted, tasting the truth of it. "But that was never the point." "What was the point then?" Emma asked, camera now recording again, her journalistic instincts returning despite her shaken state. To get us here, to this specific place at this specific time, it used my belief as a beacon. Dr. Marshall nodded slowly. It was studying us, or testing us. "We need to report this," Carlos said, moving toward the communication system. "Houston needs to know what happened." I placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "They already know. Or at least, they know enough to be afraid of what's out here. Why do you think the space program has been so carefully controlled? Why findings are classified, astronauts debriefed and silenced?" "What are you suggesting?" Dr. Marshall asked. "That we're not the first to make contact, but perhaps we're the first to fully understand what we contacted." As if in response to my words, a final message appeared briefly on all screens throughout the station. "Return, prepare, the veil thins." And then our systems returned completely to normal, as if nothing had happened. Except for the data in our instruments and the shared memory of what we had witnessed, there was no evidence of the entity's existence. We spent our remaining days in space conducting our experiments with a new perspective. The measurements consistently showed a spherical Earth, and I accepted this reality with a humility that would have been unthinkable before our encounter. In private, the four of us discussed what we had experienced, trying to make sense of it. Dr. Marshall approached it scientifically, developing theories about interdimensional beings and consciousness as a fundamental force. Carlos remained quiet, haunted by memories of previous encounters that were gradually returning to him. Emma documented everything, though we all understood that the full truth of our experience could never be shared. The world wasn't ready for it. Perhaps it never would be. On our final night aboard the Ascendant, I floated alone in the observation dome, watching Earth rotate slowly below us. From this distance, it was beautiful in its wholeness, a blue marble suspended in void, wrapped in a thin atmosphere that made life possible. How strange that I had spent so many years denying this reality, seeing conspiracy where there was only nature's elegant simplicity. But I also understood now that this physical reality, so solid and undeniable from our human perspective, was merely the surface of something far more complex. The entity, the architect, had shown me that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than any conspiracy theory could capture. When we finally returned to Earth, landing in the desert as planned, we were immediately separated and taken to different facilities. Men and women in dark suits and unmarked vehicles were waiting for us before the capsule door even opened. There was no press conference, no public welcome, just a swift and silent extraction from the landing site. I was driven to a nondescript building somewhere in Nevada, I think. The windows of the vehicle were tinted, and I lost track of time during the journey. For 3 days, I was questioned relentlessly by a rotating cast of serious-faced officials. Some wore military uniforms, others expensive suits, but all had the same clinical detachment as they probed every moment of our mission. "Tell us again about the anomaly," they would say. "Describe its appearance. What did it communicate to you? How did it affect the station's systems?" I told them everything at first, described the entity in detail, explained the revelations it had shared about the nature of reality. Their faces remained impassive, but I could see the recognition in their eyes. They knew. This wasn't the first time they'd heard such stories. By the second day, I realized my mistake. They weren't documenting my experience. They were assessing how much I knew, how much I understood. During a brief break in questioning, I overheard two of them talking outside my room. "He's seen too much," one said. "Protocol is clear in these cases." The sister is a journalist. Disappearances will raise questions. Standard psychological discrediting then. We've got enough material. When questioning resumed, I began to downplay what I'd seen. I suggested that exhaustion and cosmic radiation might have affected my perception. I emphasized the stress of the mission, the sleep deprivation, the psychological strain of confronting evidence that contradicted my long-held beliefs. They seemed satisfied with this narrative. On the fourth day, I was released with a stack of non-disclosure agreements and a thinly veiled warning about national security and the consequences of spreading delusional accounts of the mission. Emma was released around the same time. When we reunited at a quiet diner outside of Las Vegas, she looked as exhausted as I felt. "They took everything," she said without preamble. "All my footage, my notes, even my personal journal." "Did they threaten you?" I asked. She stirred her coffee absently. "Not directly, but they made it clear that publishing anything about what we saw would result in immediate legal action. They've already prepared a cover story: stress-induced hallucinations caused by equipment malfunction releasing trace amounts of psychotropic compounds into the air supply." "Convenient," I muttered. "Have you heard from the others?" "Dr. Marshall is back at NASA, reassigned to some classified project. She sent me a message, just 2 words. They're watching." "And Carlos?" Emma shook her head. "No one's heard from him. It's like he vanished." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of what we'd experienced and what we'd lost pressing down on us. "What will you do now?" she finally asked. It was a good question. My flat Earth community was eagerly awaiting my triumphant return with proof of their beliefs. They had funded the mission, supported me for years, believed in me when no one else did. But I couldn't lie to them, not after what I'd seen. "The truth," I said simply, "or at least as much of it as I can share." The backlash was swift and vicious. I posted a video on all my platforms explaining that our measurements had consistently shown a spherical Earth, and that I had to accept what the evidence told me. I didn't mention the entity or its revelations, partly because of the NDAs, but mostly because I knew no one would believe me. I lost followers by the hundreds of thousands. My social media accounts were flooded with accusations of sellout, fraud, government plant. Long-time supporters posted videos burning my books and merchandise. The more extreme elements sent death threats. My apartment was vandalized, the word traitor spray-painted across my door. The mainstream scientific community wasn't any more welcoming. They saw my conversion as too convenient, too sudden. After years of promoting what they considered dangerous misinformation, they weren't about to embrace me as one of their own. To them, I remained a charlatan who had simply changed tactics. I ignored them all and retreated to a small cabin in the mountains of Colorado, where the night sky was clear and unobstructed. Emma joined me there a few weeks later, bringing news of the outside world. "The official report on our mission was released," she told me as we sat on the porch watching the stars. "Equipment malfunction, psychological stress, inconclusive results. Not a word about the entity." "I'm not surprised," I said. "Have you tried writing about it, even as fiction?" She nodded, looking troubled. "Every publication rejects it immediately. Even when I change the details, disguise it as science fiction. It's like there's an invisible filter, preventing the story from reaching the public." "And Dr. Marshall?" "Back at NASA, but reassigned to a classified project. She wouldn't tell me details over the phone, but she said it involves studying anomalous, cosmic phenomena. She thinks they're preparing for something." I nodded, unsurprised. "They're trying to understand it, to prepare." "For what?" I pointed to the night sky, where the stars seemed to pulse with new meaning. "For when the veil thins completely." Emma shivered despite the warm evening. "Do you think it will come back? The entity?" "I don't think it ever left," I replied, watching as a satellite, or perhaps something else, moved silently across the starfield. "I think it's always been here, watching, waiting for us to evolve enough to comprehend its existence. The question isn't whether it will return, but whether we'll be ready when it fully reveals itself." "And the Earth?" she asked with the ghost of a smile. "Still convinced it's flat?" I chuckled softly, appreciating her attempt to lighten the mood. "The Earth is exactly what it needs to be. A sphere containing life, hurtling through space, sheltered by a thin atmosphere and an even thinner veil of perception from truths we are only beginning to comprehend. Over the following months, strange reports began to surface around the world. Astronomical observatories detecting inexplicable signals, pilots reporting unusual phenomena in the upper atmosphere, brief worldwide disruptions to satellite communications. Most were quickly explained away or simply disappeared from the news cycle, but I recognized the patterns. The veil was growing thinner. I've stopped posting videos and podcasts about flat Earth theories. Instead, I'm writing this account, knowing few will believe it, and fewer still will understand its implications. I'm not sure I fully understand them myself. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the static, the patterns forming at the edge of comprehension. And sometimes when I look at the stars just right, I can see the faintest outline of something vast, watching from beyond the conventional boundaries of our reality. The truth isn't flat or round. The truth is that we are not alone, not independent, not the masters of our reality. We are subjects in an experiment run by intelligences so far beyond our comprehension that we can only glimpse them through the cracks in our perception. I went to space to prove the Earth is flat. I returned knowing that the shape of our planet is perhaps the least significant truth about our existence. And yet, I don't regret my journey or the beliefs that propelled me there. They were the beacon that drew the entity's attention, the key that unlocked a door to understanding I never could have imagined. Now I wait and watch the sky, preparing for the day when the veil thins completely, when the experiment reaches its conclusion, and we finally face the architects of our reality, not as subjects but as equals, or perhaps, if we're truly fortunate, as successors. Last week, I received a package. No return address, no note inside. Just a small device resembling a compass, except the needle doesn't point north. It spins and wobbles, seemingly responding to something imperceptible. Sometimes, in the dead of night, it aligns with a point directly overhead, and when it does, the static in my head grows louder. I think Carlos sent it out. I think he's still out there, perhaps working with others who have glimpsed beyond the veil, perhaps preparing for what comes next. The entity told us to prepare. I'm still not sure what that means, but I know that knowledge is spreading, awareness is growing. More people are seeing the anomalies, feeling the presence of something vast and ancient, watching us from just beyond the edge of perception. The flat Earth was never the true conspiracy. It was just a fragment of a much larger truth, a single piece of a puzzle whose full image would shatter our understanding of reality. Look up at the stars tonight. Look carefully. You might catch a glimpse of something watching back. And when you do, remember, the veil is thinning, the architects are waiting, and the true shape of our existence is both simpler and more complex than we ever imagined.